Good afternoon. Do you hear me? Yes. Hello. My name is Gunda Reire. I'm director of the Center for International Studies here in Latvia, and I will be the moderator of this distinguished panel. Yesterday, I came back from Mexico, and especially for you and this NATO conference, I brought a really nice and inspirational totem object with me.
The NATO totem.
Yes.
Not quite, but
And now listen carefully. It's a jaguar whistle, and in the Mayan culture, jaguar is associated with power, with extraordinary physical strength, which is well suited for military sphere. Jaguars' dreams are vivid, and jaguars can transform negative energy into positive energy. And if you would blow this whistle, you would get a real, authentic jaguar's roar. I won't demonstrate it for you, but believe me, it's 100% deterrent. Yes, and deterrence is exactly an issue we are going to talk about this afternoon. And as you can see in our conference program, we are going to talk about the outcomes of the Warsaw Summit and about the issue that the member states in the Warsaw Summit agreed to strengthen NATO's collective defense, crisis management, and cooperative security. And in this panel this afternoon, we are going to evaluate the effectiveness of NATO in terms of two very important functions of international organizations, namely the deliberative function and the operational function. Namely, to be effective, an international organization must be able both to grasp the reality and to put decisions into action, which means that NATO must not only show willingness to act, but also to be able to act. And the main question of this panel is how quickly and effectively the decisions in the Warsaw Summit, decisions taken in the Warsaw Summit can be implemented across the alliance. And returning back, well, to the world culture, I must say that this panel reminds me about the concept of anicca, and it's a concept in Buddhism, which means impermanence, and it teaches us that impermanence is undeniable and inescapable fact of human existence. And why I'm saying this? Because instead of 4 speakers, we are going to have 3 speakers. And namely, I will start from my left, Gerlinde. She's head of the engagement section of the NATO, and she oversees NATO's public diplomacy engagements with audiences in all NATO nations. So it's the, let's say, NATO's eyes in the public diplomacy sphere. Then we have Jānis, who is National Security Advisor to the President of the Republic of Latvia, and after a career of 30 years in the British Army, he returned to Latvia. I can say returned to Latvia.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
And in 2003, he started to serve in the position of the head director of the Constitution Protection Bureau, which is Latvia's external intelligence service. And then we have Vlad, He's lecturer and NATO project director at the Center for Asia-Pacific Studies at the Tallinn University of Technology. And he's managing, I think, NATO's biggest project in social sciences, and he will talk about it a bit later. Well, yes, as I already said, the main question is how quickly and effectively the decisions taken can be applied. So let's start with you, Gerlinde, and yes, how could you answer to this question?
Yeah, thank you, Gunda, and good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here in Riga again, actually on a very historical date, because today we have the 10th anniversary of the Riga Summit, which happened 10 years ago. And in terms of sort of strategic continuity, I can say that me and perhaps some others here in the audience have been already with NATO already at Riga 2006, where we also adapted. So, but let's come to the latest round or the other rounds of NATO adaptation. But perhaps let me make just 3 points in order to get us started. Perhaps also before I do that, clarify effectiveness, because effectiveness is the way of achieving a result. But for NATO, effectiveness also is connected with efficiency. Efficiency meaning you need to achieve a result with commensurate costs. And I can tell you one thing, money matters in NATO, because budgets are scarce and we have to be very mindful of where we invest the limited resources. So in many ways what I'm saying is both under the effectiveness and the efficiency pattern. And then, first point, have we been effective over the past? I mean, I remember, since I'm dealing with NATO and security and international relations for quite a while, also when I was studying, I remember 40 years of NATO is enough. And then came 50 years of NATO is enough. 60 years of NATO is enough. Now we are turning 70 now, soon. We're still there. So by default, I think we must be doing something right. And in many ways, I think what we have shown over the period of time, and that is in a way also the grain of effectiveness and efficiency, is the capacity to learn and adapt. I mean, during the Cold War, if you wish, NATO was very much focused on collective defense. If you wish, a static alliance at a time. I mean, we maintained peace and security in the Euro-Atlantic area without a single shot being fired in that area. Yeah. So, and then when the Cold War ended, I mean, we embarked on a broad range of partnerships, which grew both in terms of thematic width and geographic scope. And we started operations. So we built security in the Balkans, and then came the what was called out-of-area operations, including Afghanistan and so on. So those were sort of the first and the second age of NATO. And then come the Russian annexation of Crimean Peninsula, we ended our third age, if I can call it that way. Yeah? Again, with reforming and adapting, and now with a renewed focus on collective defense and deterrence. And that brings me to my second point, Warsaw. Have we delivered on Warsaw, or are we delivering on Warsaw? I mean, on Warsaw, I think it's important to put into context that there were 2 main thematic pillars. Thematic pillar number 1 is in the area of collective defense and deterrence, but in the conjunction of a whole review of our defense and deterrence posture. Enhanced forward presence is one component of that. But of course, it is the entire sort of strategic thinking behind it, which actually makes also the difference. So you need to see it in context with other elements. Tailored forward presence concerning the Southeast was mentioned this morning. So we are developing a strategy for the Black Sea region, which would have Romania as a central land aspect, but there are sort of also nations contributing further to air and sea elements. Some nations have started to volunteer contributions there. So the Black Sea is one other aspect. At Warsaw, we declared cyber to be the further operational domain. So also that is a substantive change. We have combined the deterrence approach vis-à-vis Russia with with dialogue to vis-a-vis with Russia. So there are a whole set of components in terms of modernizing our defense and deterrence posture, which clearly also builds on the earlier decisions which we are implementing from the Wales summit, where we have decided to triple the size of the NATO response force, which incidentally was created, mentioned fully operational in Riga in 2006. So you also need to see these things in perspective. Yeah? So tripling of the NATO response force, we have created the spearhead force of 5,000 troops. And we also agreed with Allied to create these small headquarters in 8 border countries, which serve as a hub to reach back to other forces. So all in all, what you're seeing is a complete revamp of the defense and deterrence posture, including nuclear capabilities. So that was the thematic pillar number 1. And the thematic pillar number 2, emanating from Warsaw, is under the label of projecting stability. Thinking behind it to say that we cannot be secure if our neighborhood is in turmoil. Yeah? So the idea is there to help, especially the countries, the regions which are bordering us in the east and in the south, to be better able to look after their own security. That concerns Ukraine, where we decided on a comprehensive assistance package. That concerns Moldova, where we will soon open a NATO liaison office. That concerns Georgia, where we are intensifying the cooperation under the substantive NATO-Georgia package. That concerns also the continuation of the cooperation in the Western Balkans, because admittedly we have unfinished business there. Yeah? And that also concerns, last but not least, or nearly last, the continuation of our engagement with Afghanistan. It's still the biggest operation NATO has, with some 12,000 troops under resolute support to train, assist and advise the Afghan National Security Forces. And then when it comes to the south, if you wish, I mean what in our NATO jargon is MENA, Middle East, North Africa region, we will start soon to train Iraqi officers not only outside Iraq, which we have been doing already for a while, but also start training them in Iraq. So preparation is ongoing. There is a substantive defense capacity building cooperation going on with Jordan, to just mention some of the highlights. And in that respect, projecting stability, also the much intensified cooperation between NATO and the European Union is absolutely vital. Yeah? Just to mention there some points, I mean, we are working with the EU, and you had Charles Portman here earlier this morning, in countering hybrid threats, in strategic communications, in sharing intelligence, in clearly in operational cooperation. Ministers earlier this week decided that the NATO operation in the Mediterranean, Sea Guardian, will now also support the EU-led Operation Sophia in the Mediterranean. So this is operational cooperation. Cybersecurity, just to mention some of the points where NATO-EU cooperation is absolutely vital. But again, from a strategic perspective, I would say there is still potential untapped. Well, we can discuss that perhaps in the second round. And then my third point, what is relevant to remain effective? I think there's especially 3 fundamentals to be borne in mind. The first and foremost, and that was touched upon here, but also in the in the Riga conference over there, it's allied solidarity and cohesion. Yes. If we do not stick together, we lose the very foundation of what we are and what our effectiveness ultimately is built upon. Yeah? So allied solidarity and cohesion is absolutely vital. That does not fall out of the sky like manna. Because there are, of course, different views within an alliance of 28, with different histories, with different geographic locations. So finding consensus and finding compromise is absolutely vital. But so far we have always achieved that. Yeah? So if we have a key virtue in NATO, it's the balancing act. Yeah? To find a compromise between those different viewpoints. So allied solidarity and cohesion. That's point number 1. Point number 2, we need absolutely to stay true to our basic principles and values, because they are the foundation of our strengths and our credibility. We should not compromise on them, because otherwise we lose, if I put it very dramatically, we lose our soul as an organization. So this is absolutely essential. And then the third point, we need to keep on learning and innovating. Today or tomorrow, what perhaps is more important than the quantity of any given criteria is the capacity to innovate and to be creative and to have the information available to actually be innovative. So innovation, learning, adaptation is a key component. And I would make the very strong pitch to say that as democracies, we are better placed to be innovating than authoritarian regimes are. Authoritarian regimes, by definition, are closed regimes. The leadership is isolated. The information that leadership reaches is limited. The connection to reality is fractured. So whereas our exposure to reality is fairly sobering. We sometimes don't always like what we are seeing, but we have to put up with what the reality is. So I think the learning capacity you have in a democratic environment is far superior to what you have in authoritarian regimes. So in that sense, I think we have a fairly good basis for keeping innovation and learning going in NATO also in the future. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Gerlinda. Before we go further with our speeches, let me ask you a short and maybe a little bit provocative question.
Yes, please.
Yes. The Warsaw Summit communique is a really extensive document. And it includes lots of things, many of them you mentioned in your speech. Russia, Afghanistan, Middle East, Eastern Europe, Central Mediterranean, North Africa, and I could continue. Is NATO capable to do all of this?
Well, you know, in many ways, I think we have no choice. Yeah, it is absolutely vital that we combine the three core tasks, because they all relate to the three core tasks simultaneously. The three core tasks, which you can find described in the strategic concept from 2010, are collective defense and deterrence, crisis management, which is operations in the Balkans, Afghanistan, and so on, and cooperative security. And they are interlinked. Yeah, because if you want to do collective defense and deterrence, we often work with partners, Finland and Sweden, and many others. So when we do crisis management, the same. Many of our partners are contributing to the operations. So they are interlinked with each other, and they're mutually reinforcing. Yeah. So in that sense, it's the balancing act again, which I mentioned. Yeah. And then it's a question of prioritization of where to put most of the effort and the resources. But in many ways, I think it is important to remain those three core tasks together. It's like, think of the example of a stool. A stool, to be stable, needs at least 3 legs. If it has only 2, you don't want to sit on it. You know, so if it has 4, I mean, you're fine. But we have 3, so I think we are well advised to keep those 3 legs to have a good basis to work from.
Okay, thank you very much. Before introducing the speech of Jānis, I have a really good quotation of the famous psychologist Carl Gustav Jung. And he said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And as far as I know, Jānis will speak about uncertainties and challenges of NATO. Therefore, may I ask you to make the darkness conscious?
Yes, please enlighten us.
Well,
please enlighten us.
Thank you very much indeed, Gunda. Having heard that in democracies it's much easier to face the truth, I will attempt to do a little bit of that.
Yes.
And I would say that there is some good news and there's some not so good news. Now, the good news is that the Warsaw Summit really was a success. There was consensus between 28 allies. And not to put too fine a point on it, getting 28 countries to agree to do something completely new, and in some cases, some views, fairly radical, is a great success. And that means that from early next year, we will have in particular, the 4 multinational battalions in the 3 Baltic states and in Poland. As an example of NATO's solidarity, the fact that in Latvia, the multinational battalion, whose framework nation is Canada, so not even a European member of NATO, will have a minimum of declared already 5 countries involved, and quite possibly at least 1 more. That is a success. It has demonstrated the willingness to provide credible deterrence in order to prevent conflict, and it strengthened the transatlantic bond, because another of these 4 battalions, framework nation, will be the United States. So 2 of them are from the other side of the ocean, and 2 are from Europe. Infrastructure is being developed to ensure rapid road movement, rapid air movement, and so on, so that forces can be deployed quickly in Europe. And indeed, NATO defense spending has increased for the first time in 2015 in order to fulfill the requirements of Article 3. And in case you don't know Article 3 of the NATO Treaty, it means that, first of all, countries have to look after their own defense. And then, Article 4, you can talk to your allies about problems which are coming up. And Article 5, if you're attacked, then everybody comes in to help you. But the point of it is that you do your own defense first. Host nation support is being improved, and you may be surprised to learn that recent statistics show that Latvia and Lithuania have the fastest growing defense spending in the world, which is quite shocking. But don't worry, because our overall budgets aren't so huge, so even getting to 2% of GDP for defense by 2018 does not mean that we're going to be fully militarized. And as already mentioned by Gerlinda, the cooperation with the European Union is something which we've been trying to do for a long time, but overall mutual suspicion has stood in the way. Now, what about the not so good news? And there are difficulties. First of all, I said how good it is that we have consensus, but compare the difficulty of reaching consensus, particularly in the event of hybrid threats, where it is not clear what is what, compared to the ease of taking a decision if there is only one person making it sitting in the Kremlin, who does not have to have consensus. Then there is the question of credibility overall. First of all, political credibility, technical credibility, and military credibility of our deterrence. The political one, I've already mentioned the difficulty of making decisions, but in addition to that, the decision to actually allow your country to go to war is a very, very serious one, and it is by no means clear that in hybrid circumstances it'd be easy to take. On the technological side, there are at least 2 areas where Europe is way back from the United States and contemporary threats. There is what is called in jargon A2AD, which you should be aware of, anti-access area denial. Does everybody know what that means? Anybody not know what that means? Okay, anti-access area denial is a way in which an offensive power can try to prevent reinforcement reaching the object that they are trying to take. So, for instance, in the Baltic states, it means deploying close to the Baltic states S-300, S-400 air defense systems, and deploying Iskander-K and Iskander-M missile systems in the vicinity of the Baltic states, and most recently, of course, sending 2 corvettes with Caliber cruise missiles into the Baltic Sea. What all of that means is that reinforcement by air is extremely difficult because of the S-300, S-400. Reinforcement by sea is difficult because of the naval power that there is there. And pre-positioning is extremely difficult because an Iskander might just go and land on all the nice kit that you brought out just in case, and you can't use it. Now, these are technological problems which have got to be solved, and of course, they have solutions. When I say they have solutions, I would refer you to the thinking in the 1930s that was that the bomber will always get through, because nobody at that time knew about radar. They had seen Guernica in the Spanish Civil War and the awful effects. Now we're talking about A2AD in the same way. We're talking about cyber threats in the same way. Of course, we will find ways of overcoming them, but we've really got to work at it, and we've got to work at it together, and we've got to work at it as Europe, not to fall far behind the United States. Maritime element I've already mentioned. On the military side, the RAND Corporation, on behalf of the United States government, does a lot of planning. And one of the bits of planning and war fighting or war gaming that they did and published at the beginning of this year was what would happen if Russia really did try to take the 3 Baltic states. And they came to the conclusion that you need to have 7 armored brigades on the spot, otherwise you lose. Now, as an ex-military man, I know that if you put a bunch of colonels in a room and say, that's blue, that's red, here's where you're fighting it out, you'll get that answer. But it's not as simple as that. As Sun Tzu told us 800 years before Christ, the whole point is not to have to use your military force, but to get your opponent to give up because he realizes he's going to lose. And that's the problem that we have to face. Command and control, rules of engagement. This is the sort of C2 in military jargon, the sort of stuff that people don't talk about. But imagine a case where you have a multinational battalion, say in Latvia, and you have a hybrid warfare threat, and little green men appear. Will all of those 5 countries' governments be prepared to allow them to see that as an Article 5 operation? Or are they going to have to phone home and say, something's happening here, can we go and shoot them or help the Latvians to shoot them? Well, of course, the answer is going to be, well, give us more information. It is not easy. Rules of engagement. Under what circumstances do you shoot? Only when you know they are enemy forces, or maybe they're contractors, maybe they are criminal elements. Are you potentially not putting yourself in a position to be tried in an international tribunal at some stage in the future? What's the role of SACEUR, the Supreme Commander, Allied Commander in Europe? And does he have the right to call out reinforcements to the Baltic states because he sees the threat coming on? Or does he have to go to the North Atlantic Council and ask their permission? Will you please allow me to deploy these forces? Because, look, the Russians have amassed 20,000 troops for exercise Zapad 17, which will happen next autumn, right on the border of the Baltic states. Do we know? Are they going to come over? No, we don't know. Is SACEUR going to be able to react? We'll wait and see. The transatlantic bond. Trump may well fail to be the next US president, but believe me, believe me, there will be a post-Trump reaction. Because if you just look at economic factors, and I'm sure many of you have been to the United States, just drive through West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, and look at the Rust Belt and how people live there, and then drive around Europe and see how incredibly well we live here. And it's something which is not lost on the United States. Why should the US taxpayer be spending 3.5% GDP on defense in order to defend Europeans who are better off and can't be bothered to get up to the 2% of GDP? This is not going to go away. Europe pulling our weight technologically, I've already mentioned. Article 5, Valery Gerasimov is the Chief of Staff of the Russian General Staff. He's a very able man, and he has a lot of very able staff officers under him. And he is responsible for what is known as the Gerasimov Doctrine. The point of the Gerasimov Doctrine is to press the opponent as far as you can, go up to the line, but never cross the line. So you blur the line between war and peace, between internal revolt and external aggression, and most of all between conventional war and nuclear war. That is very, very dangerous. But the point is, they're going to try, if they have a go at this area in a hybrid fashion, not to cross the line sufficiently for it to become an Article 5 operation. Cyber defense, intelligence sharing, and I'm getting to the end. These are incredibly difficult things. Intelligence sharing, I know I was the chairman of the NATO Civilian Intelligence Committee in 2011, and I know that intelligence sharing goes on between individual countries far better than within organizations because mutual trust has been established. And then you work together, and then you bring somebody else in, and it develops in this sort of way. Cyber intelligence sharing is even more difficult because, as you all understand, the things you're sharing are so incredibly time sensitive and perishable that the moment you use them, they're no use again. Which is why Mark Galeotti, who many of you may be following, was saying recently that in Russian intelligence analytical circles, they're extremely unhappy about the use of the cyber capabilities they have for finding democratic gossip to use in the current campaign through WikiLeaks, instead of things which are far, far, far more important from a security and defense point of view for the Russian Federation. So it is not at all easy. There will, of course, when we have our 4 battalions, there will be a counter-reaction from Russia. Russia will not take this lying down, and most of all, it will be an information warfare reaction. It will be an attempt to discredit allies. We've seen this already, to show that these people are actually invaders, that these are non-democratic actions which are being taken, and that means our strategic communication has got to be working already now, and that is very important. NATO is thinking about this. That's why we have the Stratcom Centre of Excellence here in Riga. European Union is thinking about it. We individually in countries are thinking about it, but it's not going to be easy. Let me finish on an optimistic note. Gerlinda, please forgive me, it's not aimed at you, but let's be honest, the NATO bureaucracy has been a geriatric organization limping along for the last 20 years looking for a role. Suddenly, it's had this injection of youth fluid or whatever it is that you have, that Frankenstein gets. And it's leapt into life, and it's suddenly found there genuinely is a role for it. It's the good old role of security through peace through security, meaning defense and deterrence. And it actually does matter. And it has moved at lightning speed for an organization like that. It is unbelievable how much has been achieved in the last 2 years since Wales, and it continues to be done. And let us hope, most of all, that we retain what is most important, which has been mentioned several times down in the lecture theatre there, and also by Galinda, and that is our unity, because that is our most important asset, and the one, if we lose it, that we will lose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. Well, speaking about the new role of the Frankenstein, I have a small question also for you. There are two streams in the transatlantic thought about the future role of NATO. The first idea is that NATO has been, is, and should be a purely military organization, and that hybrid situations and resilience issues should remain in the hands of nation states. The second idea says that, well, the mood or moods in societies is actually an issue both of national and international security. And my question is, what would you say to those who believe in this purely military role of NATO? How would you persuade such, well, people, such audience?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think first of all that the reason people think that is because it was true during the Cold War.
Yes.
It was very clear that there was the Warsaw Pact, huge amount of military hardware, and then there was NATO, huge amount of military hardware, and the idea was that they shouldn't have to clash in Europe at least. And therefore, they fought proxy wars in other parts of the world. Well, that was those days, and as you know, generals always like to fight the last war. They find it very difficult to think about the next one, though they are taught in staff colleges to do just that. Therefore, there is this unwillingness to recognize that hybrid threats are actually much more real in contemporary circumstances, but they are nothing new. I mentioned Sun Tzu before. There is no question that hybrid threats have been available and used throughout the centuries. The Trojan horse, after all, that is a way of using unconventional methods to overcome your enemy. That's what it's all about. And Gerasimov will, and his people, if he has the right, if President Putin tells him to, will push at the edges. Now, the answer to all of this is that we should have a hybrid defense for hybrid threats. And therefore, it's not just NATO, it's not just the nations themselves, not just the EU, but a combination of the three. Because nations themselves, Article 3, resilience, in Latvia's case, coherence in our social programs. In other words, making sure that we don't have a division between the minority Russophone society and the Latvian society. These are things which can only be done by nation states themselves. The EU, I'm quite convinced that Vladimir Putin is more scared of the EU than he is of NATO, because he knows NATO is never going to attack him, but the EU is a direct threat because it offers a genuine alternative to Putinism, which is why it had to be put down in Ukraine, and they can't do it. And that the EU's Eastern Partnership is a way of spreading what we've been talking about, the values that we all depend on, which allow us to live the nice lives that we live, to spread those to those who are not quite so fortunate at the moment. And then at the base of it, at the bottom end, you've got NATO Article 5. So if push comes to shove and the shooting starts, whoever is on the other side knows that there's a cast iron guarantee, Article 5, that the Baltic states, for instance, or Poland or Romania or Bulgaria will not be standing on their own. Hybrid answer to hybrid threats.
Thank you. Galinda has a comment.
Very briefly, because clearly it's Vlad's turn, but I would like to make one point. NATO is not only a military organization. We are a politically military organization. Ever since the report of the so-called Three Wise Men was adopted back in 56. So it witnesses also its 60th anniversary later this year, which actually was created at a time emanating from the Suez crisis. You may remember that Egypt tried to close the Suez Canal. Some of the NATO members then helped the Egyptians, and others, notably the Americans, didn't quite like that. And in the making, the organization realized that they lacked a way of doing political dialogue. So ever since then, the whole non-military part of the organization has been actually added to it. And ever since then, NATO is defining itself as a political military organization until today, and that will remain also in future.
Yes, thank you. And now let's turn to Vlad, and I would like to quote the Warsaw communique, which says that NATO must retain its ability to respond to crises beyond its borders and remain actively engaged in projecting stability and enhancing international security through working with partners and other international organizations. Vlad, what kind of steps should be taken to achieve this goal? Well, 100%.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. When I got an email from, was it Anna, yeah? With a request to participate in the Future Leaders Forum, I thought that something has changed in Latvia, that I was invited as a Future Leader Forum, and then looked at my passport. It didn't quite reconcile with my age, and then I thought, let's just read the email again, and then it's
read
not
the small print.
It's not the sitting and listening. It's actually talking. So I'll probably do my best. I hope. This is the situation when in the Gladiator movie, then the hero of Russell Crowe, you remember when he was asking a simple question, are you entertained? So I hope you are entertained so far. I know I'm standing between you and dinner, but it's okay. A good question about partnership, but I would really like, I guess you saw a little bit of a brief about who I am. I'm representing here Tallinn University of Technology, which is basically a classic academia, so I want to get this conversation slightly backwards or even forward perhaps, to talk about political science. And more specifically about its integral part that is called international relations, because we live in the time that doesn't really have an international system anymore. There was a post-World War II international system that was created by 3 human beings. There is a very profound myth that was on for quite some time, that it was an international community that created the United Nations based international system. That's just a bunch of nonsense, because only 3 human beings created where we used to live until 2013 perhaps, and that's why we were so surprised when there was the news about Boko Haram There was the news about Daesh. There was the news about New Sarajevo, in the sense of the World War I. And New Sarajevo is, of course, Donetsk. And we simply didn't know how to behave because the system was no more. And then I remembered about two things. First one is back in time. I think I remember even the date. I put it down. It's the 19th of January 2012, when Mr. Rasmussen, the then Secretary General of NATO, was visiting Tallinn, and he said, what did he say? He said that NATO remains the world's gold standard in security cooperation. I couldn't wait until I could ask a question. I said, as if it's cooperation with whom? Is NATO to concentrate on Europe only, or does NATO have any plans to communicate with global partners, with like-minded countries? I hold New Zealand citizenship, even though I have a Ukrainian background, and I am, of course, for New Zealand, a little green country in the Down Under. Cooperation means everything. It was the first country that concluded free trade agreement with China, who would believe in that, and without any fear, and benefiting out of this in the most dramatic way. So, but this is the economics or political economy. What about cooperation in politics? Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, and even to some extent Mongolia. Mongolia is a member of the global partnership in Asia Pacific. And Rasmussen was answering, he could have answered in a more general way, but he was very, very straight forward with his answer, and he said that we'll probably, in terms of enlargement, we'll probably be sticking to Europe, but in terms of partnership, yes, we will need to find a way to get our partnership enhanced. And now we, if it was 2012, yes, and if on that year somebody had told me that there would be TPP concluded, Trans-Pacific Partnership, or Australia would become an enhanced partner of NATO, or Russian forces will be in Donetsk, I would have thought that somebody is talking or would be talking science fiction, but now this is the reality. This is the reality, and this is something that gets me to another historical fact. Actually, a book that I read when I was a student was The Road to Helsinki, and all of a sudden, a year ago in Seoul, in South Korea, I met with the person who wrote that fantastic book. And he is indeed a very distinguished diplomat and practitioner who was behind many initiatives generated by NATO. His name is John Maresca. Has anybody heard this name? John Maresca. You need to Google that at least. Is a very distinguished American diplomat who was in the team, who was in fact pushing for the establishment of a framework that had eventually led us to the creation of the Conference for Security and Cooperation in Europe and to the Helsinki Accords. We are forgetting a very crucial fact, that NATO, and it's right from 1956 until 1975, was trying to adopt a completely different role for itself as a builder of another international system, because it was not really comfortable to live in the post-World War II international system anymore. There was a feeling that NATO was behind this crucial initiative it didn't end up that as NATO was presenting this initiative to the Soviet Union. No, it had to be done through Finland, that used to be called at that point in history not Finland but Czechoslovakia, due to the fact that Urho Kaleva Kekkonen was quite welcomed in the Kremlin and in the West. That's why Finland was called by that interesting and to some extent funny name. So Helsinki, NATO was behind the initiative on Helsinki, a crucial initiative that paved the way for the first grand security, pan-European and I would say Euro-Atlantic security framework, even though we had plenty of ideology behind. So what is now? Back to the question on partnership. And that question that I asked Rasmussen led us to thinking. I think we had a good brainstorming with Dr. Nihus, and we established this, I think, a very interesting project that is called NATO Global Perceptions, Views from Asia Pacific. We're simply trying to determine if NATO has a partnership with Australia or New Zealand or Japan, South Korea or Mongolia, how do those countries perceive this partnership? Because perception is important. Perceptions are important. And perceptions matter. Was it last year during the Stratcom opening conference when the main slogan was "Perceptions matter"? Indeed. And this is what we have been doing for 18 months, I'd say almost 2 years already, collecting data from media sources, selected media sources under very strict protocol. There is plenty of theory behind. Whoever is interested, please welcome to send me an email, I will tell you. And maybe by March or February next year, you will get a volume published on the findings out of our project, as well as the elite perceptions, not only media images, because media doesn't give perception. A perception is given by the human being, and which is the media circles, and media images. Media images and elite perceptions in those 5 countries. So, and the results are incredibly interesting, and I guess NATO will really appreciate our findings because they are really crucial, and they say they tell a different story about each partner that NATO is counting on in the framework of cooperative security, because it is cooperative security. And it's not only related to cooperative security, it's related to almost everything from the political side and from the economic side when it comes to establishing good, strong, friendly linkages with the country that you don't know. It is related to public diplomacy also. It is related to the concept of listening. It is related to the concept, to the variable, who is the enemy, who is the victim. Many different things. And some of the, I will not be, of course, reading all the findings because it is absolutely impossible. But for example, the Australian side is seen. There was an interesting citation from an interview of an elite representative from Australia. It's nice to be an enhanced partner, but we could see each other more often. It was very interesting. And this is only on the verbal side, because, as I said, there is plenty of science behind the actual theory of this research, because it is based on a multiplication of theories like image theory, public diplomacy theory, and strategic narrative theory. Another interesting finding is, for example, like New Zealand elites in terms of public diplomacy, for example, New Zealand elites are confirming the almost absolute lack of visibility of NATO in the country. And even though from time to time there are some senior visitors there. Mongolia, an example, is remarkable too, because Mongolia, especially on the media side, is relying on many articles translated from the Russian sources. And this is where this enemy and victim, it could be a completely different way of looking at that. So NATO could be presented as an enemy, as an aggressor, and this is all in the media sources, and people read this, and people perceive this. It was interesting to see on a high number of occasions, and for example, for half a year of monitoring media sources, we picked up 387 articles across 5 countries, and there was such a interesting segment when you have the text that is predominantly talking about NATO in a positive way, again, objectively positive if we are not taking sides, right? But the picture is not really resonating with that. So you have the text, and the picture is killing the text, where the Ukrainian tank is in the picture, and babushka is standing crying not far away from the tank, and the image is very, very sad. However, the text is telling a lot of interesting stories about NATO itself and kind of cooperation in terms of helping Ukraine out in that particular situation. So, basically, to wrap this up, and I haven't even started because my usual talk is about a lecture, 1.5 hours. So the idea is that
and once again,
the idea is that we need to look at the situation from a broader perspective, from the perspective of international relations, and what is NATO now, what is the European Union now, what is the United States, and what is the role of China in this equation, for example, especially when it comes to the fact that Russia is increasingly becoming a periphery of China. After all, the Russian Federation is a country with a population that is less than of Bangladesh. So with this huge territory and with the development that the Chinese economy is skyrocketing. So we have a lot of questions, and we have a lot of studies, and so if you have any questions, I'm very happy to answer, not necessarily now, but by email. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vlad. I think it is high time to start the discussion. Do we have a microphone? And here in the first row, please, the first question. And when you're asking, please indicate your name and well, eventually whom the question is addressed.
Sure.
To.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for a great talk, great discussion. My name is Bartko Jacek. I'm originally from Poland, but last year I lived in the US, and previously I lived over 6 years in Australia. And I guess I have 2 questions to Vlad. You mentioned about importance of this partnership, but I'm just curious what kind of partnership it is. What is the nature of this partnership? And since we are talking about Europe and North America mostly, how Australia or New Zealand can contribute to that since they are so far away. Mm-hmm. And my second question is in relation to China. Do you think that new Silk Road can be a threat for NATO in economic terms, and this may lead to something else? Mm-hmm. How do you see that? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's collect 3 or 4 questions here. The gentleman in the third row.
Jakub Tomashev from the Czech Republic. I'd like to ask Mr. Kazuchin, you talked about the need to build hybrid defense in order to respond to hybrid threat. And part of that strategy should take place on the national level. And I wonder whether you could elaborate on what Latvia does to build its hybrid sort of societal resilience. Thank you.
So, and then we have a question here, in the first row.
Why don't you start? You have it.
I thought it was you.
Okay, so I was a bit confused.
Okay.
Excuse me. Ulrich Smet, Denmark. Thank you for some very interesting points here. I would like to ask 2 questions. All of you, of course, welcome to answer, thank you. But they're mostly directed first to you, sir. You talked about how our offices are trained in a way to look at new threats, but they keep on, looking at old threats. So I expect that has something to do with the equipment they end up running when they get into duty. And so, how can we place our officers in an environment where they can actually think about new threats and think about tomorrow or what's happening right now, instead of maintaining the equipment and the traditions we have? And second, my second question goes to you, sir, on the issue of NATO, EU, and perhaps even the West as part of international relations. So moving on from your discussion about NATO and EU and how this was part of maybe trying to build a new order, is it too much to say that we would actually have to look at what's the role of the West in 2050? Is there anything called the West anymore? And if so, what's the role of NATO and EU and maybe even the UN in that regard? Thank you.
Thank you. Therefore, we've got, for the first round, 5 questions about the partnership with Australia, about the Silk Road, Latvia's resilience, how to adapt, or transform our traditions and equipment to the new threats, and the last one about the future role of the West. Let's start with Vlad. I think you had
that's about,
a bunch of questions.
Yeah, I have 3 questions, so, but I will probably ask Australia and New Zealand first, and then we go around, and then the Australia and New Zealand, how can they contribute? And basically that was a mutual initiative, of course, by the political elites from NATO and from Australia, and correspondingly from Australia and New Zealand, to establish some kind of partnership. What kind of partnership? At that moment of establishing the partnership, it wasn't explicitly clear. However, New Zealand and Australia have had a good experience of working with NATO in Afghanistan, and not only. The idea is that, and our project really underlining this fact, is that every single partnership has to be different, because the expectations are different. For example, I will very briefly, again, this is an incredible brief. For example, how New Zealand elites in general are perceiving NATO's global partnership as a program. For example, in general, the focus is on maintaining interoperability so we can work with NATO in the future. Very positive connotation. A sense that we benefit from the rule-based order that NATO contributes to. It's because New Zealand is a classic democracy. It's one of the oldest democracies, I mean true democracy in this world. And the For example, the benefit for New Zealand is in maintaining a broad and diverse set of security linkages, including those with NATO as a reliable partner. So it's not the same for Australia. Australia is very, very different, even though they are not far away. And Australia plays not so high-profile rugby anymore as compared to New Zealand. Well, that's the reality. They have to face they have to face this. Who is the world champions? So the All Blacks, of course. That's a very, very different kind of a connotation. But in the same time, it's a bit beyond a simple curiosity in terms of partnership. And quickly, because I can go on and on about Belt and Road Initiative. Belt and Road Initiative is one of my favorite subjects, and in fact, at the university, I'm also coordinating the activities on the 16+1 framework, think tank frameworks because I'm from Center for Asia Pacific Studies, so I have visited Beijing on a number of occasions in that sense. That's a big discussion because the Belt and Road Initiative has inclusiveness in its nature. Plus, this is a story for the outside that the Chinese government is telling. It has a completely different side, that is the inside kind of way of looking at the same thing. The story for the insiders is the Chinese dream. And this is to understand. I don't see Belt and Road Initiative as a threat for NATO, because it's in a way China is trying to fix some of the internal issues by implementing this. Plus, it wants to have a little bit of a broader look in its periphery, in the direct periphery, which is the Central Asia. In a certain way, this is the implementation of a very famous statement from one Chinese scholar: "Let's march west," because it's easier, and China has a good story in marching west in terms of implementing its infrastructural development, because the infrastructure in China in 20 years jumped to a remarkable height. It's not compared to any other nation. So this is too complicated to actually answer this straight. Yes, it's a threat. No, it's not a threat. It's not a threat. It's not a not threat. It's about China. Do you know? It's just to finish this off. There is a true story when somebody, I forgot the name, who exactly, what is the American director, was asked whether he had ever read War and Peace, and he said, "Yeah, I read War and Peace. I took I took a lesson, a 20-minute lesson of Russian language reading, and I read War and Peace in a very short time. It involves Russia." So this is the story about the book. This is the story about China. It involves China. It's a country of its own kind.
Thank you, Vlad. Then, Yanis, how about building the resilience of Latvia?
Can I just say a couple of words about what Australia, New Zealand, and NATO have in common? And what it is values. And I think the rule-based order, that is absolutely it. And when we talk about the rules, I mean, they're basically inviolability of international borders. You don't break them by military force. The rule of law, freedom of speech. These are the basic things which are in common for democracies like New Zealand, Australia, and those in NATO. And these are the things, if we want to preserve them in the 21st century, we probably do need to cooperate, and cooperate rather better than we have in the past. What is Latvia doing? Well, first of all, it's understanding the challenge. And it's all very well saying national answers to hybrid challenges and national resilience. But there are a lot of things that can be done. First of all, understanding that threats, hybrid threats, are not purely military or purely security in the traditional sense, but they also involve, for instance, the economic divergence between high and low income within your country. If there is a growing divergence, as for instance there is in the United States of America at the moment, and a shrinking middle class, then it is pretty obvious that sooner or later one side is going to start pointing fingers at the other. And therefore these are things which really need to be thought about. Health. If the health service is not something which people feel the country is giving to the extent that the country could afford it, education, if the education system is not adequate and yet the country is spending 2% on defense, well, it's not going to have public support if it's not seen to be in balance with these other things. Of course, in addition with that, you have the police force having a professional and an objective police force, which is reflective of the social makeup of your population, a proper border, and of course, particularly in the case of Estonia and especially Latvia, social cohesion, not just at the economic level, but also at the interethnic level. It is something which we have not paid sufficient attention to. It is something which President Putin has pointed out in the case of Estonia and Latvia repeatedly over recent years, and we know he always tells us in advance what he's going to do. Often it's not very nice. Therefore, it's an area that we need to think about a great deal more and do much more to ensure that all of our populations want to live in our country, feel a loyalty to the country, and want to defend it. As far as officers are concerned, the joke really is that officers or generals always want to fight the last war. It's not an equipment issue, actually. It's more it's a thinking issue. And as an example of why it's the way it is, I'm sure most of you will be aware of the BBC film about Latvia and how a insurrection starts in Latgale. Has anybody seen this film? Oh, very few of you. Well, there is a BBC film, and it's a sort of pseudo-documentary, and it paints a vivid picture of the same sort of thing that's happening in Donbass, in Latgale, which is the eastern part of Latvia, where there are quite a lot of Russian speakers. And then there are a number of senior people, some of whom are here at this conference at the moment, who then try to pretend to make decisions on behalf of the United Kingdom. And in the end, would they go to nuclear war against Russia because of that? Well, it's an absolute classic example. The whole point of the Gerasimov doctrine is not to do what your enemy expects you to do. You do something different. And if you compare Donbass with Latgale, Donbass has been a complete failure from the Russian point of view. They have not achieved even the tactical results they wanted, and absolutely not the strategic one, because the strategic one was to get little brother Ukraine back into the fold so that little brother Ukraine wants to be with big brother Russia and stick together. And they've actually blocked that off for a generation at least. Now, therefore, I think it is very unlikely that in the case of Latvia, they'll try and do something similar. They'll do something else. They might do it through insurgency in Riga, through terrorism. There are a lot of things you can do. What officers and generals need to do is to try to think laterally, try to imagine themselves in the shoes of their adversaries. It's not easy, because the moment you put on a uniform and you stand in a straight line along with the other guys in a straight line, you do have a tendency to groupthink. That's the nature of the military in general, and it's the nature of people who choose to join the military in particular. Therefore, it's not easy, but it can be done, and there are people who do these things. We've seen Stanley McChrystal is a very good example. General de Gaulle in the period between the two world wars, where he saw how armor ought to be used in the same way as the Germans saw it. But he was the only one on the French side who realized that armor needs to be grouped together, tanks I mean, and infantry fighting vehicles need to be grouped together to have any effect. And you penny packet them out with heavy lorry-borne infantry, and they're going to be absolutely no use at all. Therefore, there are people, and that's why military forces are run by civilians, ministries of defense in democratic countries, so that the civilians can give the broad guidance to their military leaders, tell them what they want to achieve, then the military will sort out how to do it.
Thank you. Galinda,
yeah,
do you
very
want to
briefly
add something here?
on partnerships, and perhaps also on the sort of innovation. On partnerships, in many ways, clearly, partners come in very different shades, and the like-minded partners, Australia, New Zealand, Finland, Sweden, that's one group, but of course there are also other partners which are less like-minded than those. What unites them all is that they're all purely voluntary. It's a voluntary engagement on both sides, and they're always driven by a win-win on both sides. You know? So they're tailor-made in that respect. But the second point there is that partners is not only countries. Partners for us also is clearly the engagement with international institutions. The EU was mentioned, but it doesn't stop there. I mean, the European Union, the UN, the OSCE, where we currently have an intense debate about the so-called Vienna document. You may have heard about that in the context of trying to enhance the transparency and predictability of Russian exercises, especially the SNAP exercises. So that's a cooperation with the OSCE and many others. So one should not forget the relation of international organizations there. And then second, on innovation, I think to a degree we have an inbuilt capacity there, because we have Allied Command Transformation in Norfolk, Virginia, which has as its core mandate actually to help the ongoing transformation of the organization. And in many ways they are looking into sort of future threat scenarios, future perspectives, future world scenarios. You even find information online if you Google strategic analysis capabilities. They have reports about the future challenges in urban warfare, for example, which is a big challenge for organizations such as NATO, because more and more people live in urban environments. So how to tackle that, and then the related question of how to protect civilians in these type of operations is clearly key. But also, in many ways, I would say that our engagement with civil society or with research institutions of all nature is part of our learning curve, because they help us to think forward and to see what is the next frontier or the next perspective we should actually adopt. And then my last point, when it comes to sort of the Asia-Pacific area, we should not forget that we have members who are also Pacific nations. We keep on forgetting that. I mean, we look at NATO as a transatlantic alliance, but the American allies are Pacific nations. So I think we have an inbuilt view on the Pacific there, although we do not yet have a NATO-China commission, although there are voices out there who are advocating for that.
Yes, thank you, Carolina. So we still have time for 3 questions.
Well, was this question about the West, I think. What would be the role of the West?
Sure.
Just one short answer. It's a good question, but this has a this is a speculation, because there are so many actors and so many variables involved in this process. So now different countries do different things, trying to get themselves accustomed to the system that does not exist. What kind of different things? Argentina is sending women to give birth in Antarctica. Somebody is placing the flag underneath of the North Pole. So it's a very, very hectic situation at the moment. Indonesia wants to be in the Security Council. South Africa wants to be in the Security Council, even though South Africa has appalling record in terms of internal security. That almost 19,000 people were killed last year in South Africa. So it's murders. It's not just So we have. I mean, the West. It does exist, but it's impossible to sell to the international community now as a cohesive something that can be on one side and the other one it will be on the other side or something like this, because it's it could have been done, but long time ago, not now. Now it's a multipolar global redesign. This is what is going on, and we just need to be aware of this.
Okay, well, 2 short questions and 2 short answers, because I was informed that, although we started a bit later, we have to end, on time. Therefore, 2 questions, here and there. Sorry.
Yes.
There's still dinner.
My name is Gry Falkenström from the Danish Institute for International Studies. My first short question is for Yanis Krasochin. That's right. You said that NATO has been kind of struggling to find its identity and its role after the end of the Cold War, and suddenly they have found it again in playing this old security game of deterrence. So would you say that Russia is actually saving NATO by taking on the role as aggressor that we can unite against? That was the first question. And then my second question...
Sorry, only one question.
Okay, I will talk to you afterwards.
Yes. So, and the second question here, yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Roger Hilton from Canada. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on how you can actually beat anti-access aerial denial once it's been installed. Right before leaving, Supreme Commander Breedlove wrote this very depressing article in Foreign Affairs. And it basically says now that it's been set up in Kaliningrad and now potentially in Crimea, I don't know if this is a permanent feature now that NATO has to deal with, but what are the practical ways operationally that you can beat it or you can reduce its impact on logistics? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your questions. And
very quickly, has Russia saved NATO? In a way, yes, but it would have been much, much better if Russia and NATO had been able to develop this relationship that we've been talking about over the last 20 years, which allowed both together, and ideally together with China as well, to solve the world's problems. Well, the world isn't as simple as that, unfortunately. How do you beat A2AD? Well, these are electronic systems. Every electronic system is prone to have electronic countermeasures. they can perhaps be beaten by new types of anti-missile defenses, or some sort of electronic gear which prevents them working well. I don't know. But what I do know is that every time in history, in the past, when we've thought something is so incredibly good, then a few years later we find out it's not quite as good as it seemed. And I know that the United States perhaps have not been putting quite enough money and effort into researching against this, but at the same time, the foundation for that research certainly exists technologically, and how quickly that can be weaponized, I really don't know, and I don't think that anybody would say, because it is far better not to show your cards that you can defeat S-300 or S-400 systems before the time comes that you actually have got to do it.
Thank you very much. And I think we all spent a really intellectual and interesting afternoon. And let's thank our distinguished speakers with applause. So, thank you very much. And those who hadn't an opportunity to ask questions, you still have an opportunity beyond this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
and
Gunda.
have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.